Hey guys, and welcome to another video of The Guide, our tutorial series on FIFA 19. I'm Benjamin, also known as Tess, and today we want to talk about a very important gameplay mechanic for the defense. It's about player switching. And obviously this is crucial, and there are two techniques how to do it, and the first one is the most common one, the most known one. It's a player switching with a button, so you press the L1 or LB button and you switch the player. But there's also some sort of an expert strategy, expert technique, which is used by a lot of pros, and this is the player switching with the right stick. And we know that a lot of players are struggling with it. So in this video we want to cover the basics about player switching, and then we want to explain how this technique with the right stick is working, but also how you can train it, how you can get accustomed to it. And then we also want to explain how you can deal with certain situations when you may be struggling when you want to player switch with the right stick. So now let's start with the basics about player switching. First of all, we come to the settings for player switching, and the first one is auto switching, and you want to have this set to airballs or manual. Otherwise it's going to be hard to have full control about the player switches. And the second one is the second defender switch icon, and we recommend to leave this on because this will provide you further information to what player you're going to switch when you use the button. But I'm going to explain this later in a few seconds. And we also have another more in detail video about these settings, and this is highlighted now in the top right corner or in the video description. So the standard way to switch the player is using the button, and when you have the second icon option on, there's a white indicator above the player that you're going to get switched to. So when you press the player switching button, L1 or LB, you're going to get control of this player. And usually it's the player who's the nearest to the opponent player who's in ball possession, but it's not always the case, and there are some exceptions. But over the time when you play FIFA, you will get some experience and a better understanding or feeling to which player you're going to get switched to. But this is the downside of player switching with a button, because you only have one option and the game decides which player this option is going to be. And you will notice that in some situations you want to switch to another player, but you're limited and don't have any freedom by using the button. But this is where the expert strategy comes in hand with the player switching with the right stick. And what you basically do is you flick the right stick into the direction to the player that you want to switch to. But to make this more understandable, let's take a look at an example. In this situation, my opponent has some space in front of my defensive line, and based on his options, I assume that he's going to make a pass up to his winger who's starting a run right now. And I want to intercept this pass, or at least interfere the dribbling of the player who's in ball position right now. And I think that my other central defensive midfielder is a much better choice to do this. But as you can see by the white indicator right now, it's above my center back, and this wouldn't be a very good player switch. So now I can use the right stick player switches, and for this I flick the right stick to the top. And this means that I'm going to switch to the player who's to the top of the player that I'm controlling at the moment. So player switching with the right stick is always relative around the player that I'm controlling. Based on his position, you flick the right stick into the direction of the player that you want to switch to. So here I flick it to the top, and by that I switch to my defensive midfielder instead of the center back, pull him back and intercept the pass. Here's another example to make this concept and the player switches with the right stick more understandable. My opponent has two options, and the player switch with the button is not really an option at the moment, as you can see by the white indicator. So what I do now is I flick the right stick to the bottom left and I switch to my midfielder to interfere this play. Player switching with the right stick is very nice and does give you a lot of options, but it can also be a little bit tricky to get the directions always right, and sometimes it will get some sort out of control, as you can see in this example. So here I want to switch to my defensive midfielder, but I mess up and I end up with my attacking midfielder. So this is not the best choice at the moment. So now I want to switch one more time to my defensive midfielder, and I end up with my right back. So this is the moment when I realized I screwed up. But this is not a big problem, because you have to always keep in mind you can always reset by using the player switching with a button. So when you come into a situation like that, when you lost control, lost orientation, just press the L1 or LB button and switch to a player which is nearby to the opponent who's in ball possession, and then right after you can start to use the player switching with the right stick once again. This leads me to a combo that I do quite frequently. When my opponent is playing a longer pass, I do a player switch with a button, and right after I try to anticipate what my opponent is going to do next and do a player switch with the right stick to interfere this play. So I combine the player switch with the button and the right stick. And this helps me because when my opponent is playing a longer pass, I need some sort of a reset. I could also do with the right stick, but there's a chance that I screw up or I waste time. But instead I do the player switch one time with the button, and by that I get a player which is nearby the opponent who's in ball position, and this makes sure that I'm close to the action, so I can use this to orientate myself and then go on with the player switching with the right stick. Even though in these two examples it wasn't necessary to do the second switch with the right stick because the player switch with the button would have selected me the same player, I still did it with the right stick because then I don't have to look out for the second indicator and I have full control over the player switch. Now we come to one of the last talking points in this video. How you can train the player switches with the right stick, how you can get accustomed to it. And this is also going to be some sort of an answer to the question, when should you use the player switches with the right stick, because the situations are quite similar. So you should pick situations which are stable and easy for you to do the player switches in the beginning. So what do I mean by that? For example, when your opponent is doing his build-up play, especially in his own half, and he's using a lot of switching sides. This is a very good situation to train the player switches with the right stick because of several factors. A, the space is large, so this does give you a lot of time to do the player switches, and this also leads to B. Because the space is so large, your players won't be tied together, so you don't have many options available close by, and this makes the player switching with the right stick easier. And C, if you screw up with the player switch with the right stick, it's not too bad because your opponent is still far away from your own goal and you have plenty of time to recover with the correct player switch. To illustrate this a little bit further, take a look at these two situations. It's so much easier to do the player switches with the right stick when your opponent is in build-up play because there's so much space. And compare this to a situation when your opponent is right in front of your goal. There are so many players of your team that you can switch to and they are so close by, so it's easy for you to do a mistake. And when you do a mistake, it's more likely that you're going to concede a goal. You can also train the player switch with the right stick when your opponent does have a goal kick and he's taking his time. And another good situation is when your opponent does have a throw-in. So as I already said, stable situations so they can get used to the use of the right stick. Player switching with the right stick can be also key to successfully defend corners. Right after your opponent got a corner, use the right stick to select your center back or any other player who's good in the air. Usually there's someone right behind you. Position this player and then have a much better chance in not conceding by this corner. Player switching with the right stick can bring your defensive game onto the next level, since you can choose your defender that you're controlling more freely. But it can also be somewhat tricky in some situations to do it correctly. So you should try to get accustomed to it in easy and controllable situations and then steadily increase the proportion of right stick player switches. I personally do most of the player switches with the right stick, but when it gets really crowded with my players around my box or my opponent speeds up his game with a longer pass, I shift more towards player switching with a button, as explained in this video. More skillful players than me might have a higher share of right stick player switches, but it shouldn't be your target right from the beginning that you do every player switch with the right stick. You have to develop this technique and your skill for it over the time by practicing. Check out our other videos about defending to take advantage of your newly acquired skill regarding player switching and combine it with other concepts and techniques. You can find the link to these videos in playlists in the video description. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell to not miss any upcoming videos of the guide. You can also find information about our private coaching offers with elite and top 100 players. If you find this video helpful, please leave a thumbs up. Thanks for your attention, keep a clean sheet, I'm out.